Hi, folks. We're still in a weird place. I think I've got this working. Today we're going to finish up on, well, we're not going to finish entirely because we haven't got to the cranial skeleton yet, but this will be fairly short because we're going to deal with, the axial skeleton, which runs down, obviously, the axis of the body. And I'm going to do a combination of using the anatomage table as well as a few hands-on things that I've got. I brought my friend in too to talk with you about. And it's relatively straightforward. So the axial skeleton is running down the length of the body, as you can see here. And we can divide this up into different pieces. We've got the cervical vertebra, which are right there. And they're obviously supporting the neck. Cervical vertebra number 1 makes contact with the cranium and allows the cranium to move forward and backwards. Cranial nerve 1 is named after a famous character in Greek mythology known as Atlas. And if you've never heard of that, look it up. It's a little difficult to see well on this. I can isolate it. Oops, that's the second one. I don't want that one. I want the first one. And so you can't really see that all that well from this. So I brought a couple in. Here is a model, a plastic cast of the first cervical vertebra, but you can't really see that. And I would unshare the screen and show this to you in higher signal, but I'm terrified that if I stop sharing the screen, the whole thing's going to crash. So since that doesn't work terribly well, and that light is too bright, I brought in a bigger one. This is the first cervical, oops, there we go. Here's the first cervical vertebra, and here's the second cervical vertebra. There's an atlas, and the second one is called an axis because it allows the vertebra for the head to rotate. So pretty much kind of like the radius and the ulna, we've got one that allows us to move up and down and one that allows us to rotate back and forth. Okay, so there's a couple characteristics of cervical vertebra. First of all, what you'll notice from what I've circled is there's no ribs attached, obviously, because it's in the neck. The other thing is it also has areas called the transverse foramen where the vertebral arteries, which are ascending up to provide blood supply to the head, are located. And so if you look really closely, you can see on this plastic cast a transverse foramen. Okay, that's not as interesting as this one though. Here we have a cervical vertebra of a giraffe. And now look at that. Look at the size of that transverse foramen. That's the size of the blood vessel that's going into it. But what you'll notice on one side, we have an articulation with the vertebra. I don't know exactly which number this is. It's sometime C through 7. I'm not exactly sure. The articulation with the one in front of it, and then the one behind it is an articulation for the one that it's in front of. So that's a distinct characteristic of the cervical vertebra and how to identify them. In lab, we're just going to hand you a vertebra and say, here, tell me where did it come from. Then we get down to, we get down to the thoracic vertebra. Classically defined as those vertebra that, oops, I didn't mean to do that. Stop it. That have rib attachments to them. And when you look at a thoracic vertebra, there are 2 rib attachment points for almost all of them, not all of them, but most of them. the tuberculum and the capitulum, and you'll see those when you get a chance to come into the comparative anatomy lab one of these days, or you can see them on my friend here. And well, you can't really, but there's 2 points of contact right there. And then if we flip them over, you'll see that those ribs, do you want to clear the drawings? Yes. There is cartilage that attaches onto the center part, which is the sternum. Turn this guy around. And what you can't really see clearly on this or on that is the sternum is not a single structure. It's a bunch of bones. They're called sternabri. And one of the best ways to show this is I'll pull up a dog on the anatomy table here one of these days, and I'll show you. You can clearly see individual bones all the way running down the sternum. But collectively, the sternabri are generally fused, and we call that the sternum. Then we have a few what are called floating ribs down at the bottom, which don't end up making contact with the sternum. And then we get a little further down into the lumbar region. So we have cervical, we have thoracic, and now we have the lumbar region. And if you were handed a vertebra and I said, where did it come from? The first thing you look for, cervical, does it have a transverse foramen? Does it have a place for those arteries to go through? And the answer is no. So, okay, it's not cervical. Is it a thoracic? Are there attachments for the ribs? And I've got one vertebra in my teaching collection that I love to put on test just to annoy students, because on one side there's a vertebral foramen, on the other side there's attachment for ribs. So it's either C7 or T1. I don't have any idea. It's just fun. It's fun to drive students crazy. And so you look at your vertebra that I handed you and you say, it's not cervical, there's no transverse foramen. It's not thoracic, there's no rib attachments. It just looks like a plain old vertebra. And I hate that description, but that in many ways is the easiest way to identify the lumbar vertebra. And then those come down and we're going to begin to make contact with the sacral vertebra. And in humans and in most mammals, not all mammals, but in most mammals, these are all fused into what we refer to as the sacrum. And while I'm here, let's rotate this over for a second. I was kind of hoping maybe you could see the sternabri. Not really. Okay, that's all right. And then for non-humans, what you'll see, and we're going to do this again with a dog or a cat later, and then you'll see, of course, the caudal vertebra, which would extend past that to form the tail. Caud means tail, but it's very, very rare that humans have tails, although it has happened occasionally. All right, so there is the axial skeleton. What we're going to do next time is we're going to go up and start with the cranial skeleton. And to be honest with you, I'm not going to begin with a human. I'm going to begin with probably a dog or a deer because they're easier to see. The human skull, if you look at it, those sutures that you see here, so here's your nasal and frontal and all those other cool bones, but it's not quite as easy to differentiate on a human because they're more fused. But boy, if you can get it down, and I'll pull up probably a dog. You get it down in a dog, then it's a piece of cake to walk through a human to identify those bones. So there's your axial skeleton in a nutshell. And I'll see you next time when I get a chance to talk about the cranial skeleton. And we haven't even gotten close to talking about the muscles yet, but we're going to talk about muscle groups also. So have a beautiful day, whatever day this might be, and I will see you next time. All right, bye guys.